Imagine this, a world with no grocery stores, no doctors on call, and no internet to Google how to fix a leaky roof. That was the reality for our medieval ancestors. So how on earth did they survive? It wasn't just luck. It was a treasure trove of practical knowledge passed down from generation to generation that kept families alive and thriving against all odds. Today, we're going to unlock some of that lost wisdom. This isn't just a history lesson. These are skills that are surprisingly relevant even in our modern world. Let's start with the absolute foundation of survival: food. For medieval families, the pantry wasn't a cupboard. It was the entire landscape around them. Every child learned to identify edible plants, berries, nuts, and roots. This wasn't a hobby, it was a daily chore. They knew which mushrooms were a delicious meal and which would be their last. They could spot wild garlic, nettles, and dandelions, not as weeds, but as free, nutritious ingredients for the dinner pot. Nettles, for instance, once boiled, lose their sting and are packed with vitamins, tasting a bit like spinach. This deep knowledge of foraging meant that even when crops failed or game was scarce, there was always something to eat. They weren't just surviving. They were masters of their local ecosystem. But finding food was only half the battle. How do you make it last through a long, harsh winter without a refrigerator? The answer is preservation, and our ancestors were geniuses at it. Salting was the most common method. Meat and fish were layered in barrels of salt, which drew out the moisture and stopped bacteria in its tracks. This is how they enjoyed bacon and ham year-round. Then there was smoking. Building a simple smokehouse allowed them to infuse meat and fish with smoke, which not only preserved it, but also added incredible flavor. Drying was another key technique. Fruits, vegetables, and herbs were laid out in the sun or hung in a dry, airy place. This concentrated their flavors and made them last for months. Think of it as ancient-style sun-dried tomatoes or fruit leather. And let's not forget pickling and fermenting. Vegetables were submerged in brine or vinegar, creating pickles, and cabbage was fermented to make sauerkraut's process that not only preserves the food, but also creates beneficial probiotics. These weren't just clever tricks. They were the technologies that stood between a family and starvation. Beyond food, health was a constant concern. With no modern medicine, they relied on what we now call herbalism or folk medicine. The garden and the forest were their pharmacy. Every family, especially the women, knew the properties of common herbs. Chamomile was used to calm nerves and aid sleep. Yarrow was known as a woundwort for its ability to stop bleeding and prevent infection when applied to cuts. Willow bark, which contains a substance similar to aspirin, was chewed to relieve pain and fevers. Peppermint was brewed into a tea to soothe an upset stomach. They would make poultices, tinctures, and salves from these plants. It wasn't magic. It was practical, observational science passed down through generations. They understood that nature provided not just sustenance, but also remedies for their ailments. While it was no substitute for modern surgery or antibiotics, this knowledge of herbal first aid was incredibly effective for dealing with the everyday injuries and illnesses of medieval life. Now, let's talk about the home itself. Medieval houses weren't built by construction companies. They were often built by the families who lived in them, using materials sourced directly from their land. A common technique was wattle and daub. This involved weaving a lattice of wooden strips, the wattle, and then plastering it with a sticky mixture of clay, sand, animal dung, and straw, known as daub. This created surprisingly well-insulated walls that were cheap and easy to repair. Roofs were often thatched with reeds or straw, which provided excellent waterproofing and insulation. These skills weren't just for building a new house. Knowing how to patch a roof, replaster a wall, or fix a broken fence was essential daily maintenance. Every person had to be a part-time carpenter, mason, and roofer. This self-sufficiency was the cornerstone of their existence. They didn't call a handyman. They were the handyman. And what about staying warm? Central heating was a distant dream. The fireplace, or hearth, was the heart of the home. It provided heat, light, and a place to cook. Managing the fire was a critical skill. You had to know what kind of wood burned hottest and longest, how to bank the embers at night so you could easily restart it in the morning. And most importantly, how to do it all without burning the house down. Families would gather around the hearth in the evenings to share stories, mend tools, and stay warm. They also had simpler methods for warmth. They wore layers of clothing made from wool, a fantastic natural insulator. Beds were often curtained to trap body heat, and families might even share beds for extra warmth. They understood the simple physics of heat retention and used it to their advantage in every way they could. Resourcefulness was woven into the fabric of medieval life. Nothing was ever wasted. When an animal was butchered for meat, every single part was used. The hide was tanned into leather for shoes, belts, and containers. The bones were boiled to make broth or carved into tools, needles, and even game pieces. The fat was rendered down to make tallow for candles and soap. Even the intestines were cleaned and used as casings for sausages. Old clothes weren't thrown away. They were patched, mended, and then, when they were completely worn out, torn into rags for cleaning or quilting. This waste not, want not philosophy wasn't a trendy slogan. It was a fundamental rule for survival. It demonstrates a profound respect for resources that we could certainly learn from today. Every object had a life cycle, and its end was just the beginning of a new purpose. Finally, let's touch on a skill that bound everything together: observation and weather prediction. Without weather apps, medieval farmers and sailors became expert meteorologists. They learned to read the sky, the wind, and the behavior of animals. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. Red sky in morning, sailor's warning is a saying that comes from this era. They knew that certain cloud formations predicted rain, that the direction of the wind could signal a change in temperature, and that birds flying low might mean a storm was approaching. This wasn't superstition. It was a pattern recognition system built on centuries of observation. Knowing when to plant their crops, when to harvest, or when it was safe to travel was crucial. A mistake in judgment could mean the loss of a year's harvest or a life lost at sea. Their connection to the natural world was intimate and essential. So when we look back at our medieval ancestors, we shouldn't see them as simple or primitive. We should see them as resilient, resourceful, and incredibly knowledgeable. They were foragers, preservationists, herbalists, builders, and meteorologists all rolled into one. Their ancestral knowledge was a complex system of skills that allowed them to live in harmony with their environment and survive challenges we can barely imagine. And while we may not need to thatch our own roofs or forage for every meal, there's a powerful lesson here about self-sufficiency, resourcefulness, and having a deeper connection to the world around us. Perhaps some of this lost wisdom is worth rediscovering. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the past as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration. See you next time.